Part 4. Good and Evil. Well then, demonstrate before the palaces of the rich. Demand work. If they do not give you work, demand bread. If they deny you both, take bread. Emma Goldman. Most assuredly I say unto you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs up some other way, is the same as a thief and a robber. King James Version, John 10:1. This is a reference to false teachings. Now, I want to unpack the concept of God a little bit. I should have maybe done this earlier in the presentation. Political belief is formed by how one conceives the concept of God. In a very basic sense, an individual carries one of three kinds of beliefs with respect to the existence of God. One, nature is God. Man created society to get away from nature with the knowledge and experience to know that Mother Nature is a cruel and unforgiving bitch. Living by the laws of nature is the opposite of living free. We are not only at war with nature, its food supply, and its weather, but against one another without laws under anarchism as savages. The masses, more often than not, have seen the anarchist for what he is, an arrogant, albeit sensitive snob, and they have rewarded him accordingly. Anarchism can only work in small groups, where everyone knows one another and there's no need for money and therefore no need for laws. Under pure anarchy, you own what you can carry and defend. In a small group, everybody knows each other, you don't have to worry about your stuff getting stolen, or whatever. If anarchy was ever achieved on a wide scale, there would be the need for laws. And you'd get exactly the opposite of anarchy. You'd have lawyers and attorneys and legislators tripping all over courtrooms and houses of legislation trying to determine what's best, just like in that Plato quote that I gave earlier. And what a complex system like that does is allow the powers that be to help their friends and harm their enemies. This is one view of justice presented in Plato's Republic. This is an oligarchical view of justice. 2. Man is God. There is no God, and the best and most capable of men should lead humanity. This is sometimes known as humanism, it's progressivism, it's communism, it's essentially organized atheism. The thing that I particularly like about having the ideological enemy of progressivism is that its basic ideology sounds so good and logical at first, but their premises always fall flat on their faces, with even the smallest of a push. Only one absolute truth exists in progressivism. Progressivism always falls on its face, even with the most cursory examination. Progressivism has only empty platitudes, empty slogans, and illogical precepts from which to lead the masses. Its precept is fundamentally wrong from the start. Alix de Tocqueville had this prediction for where America was headed in the following quote. Society will develop a new kind of servitude which covers the surface of society with a network of complicated rules through which the most original minds and the most energetic characters cannot penetrate. It does not tyrannize, but it compresses, enervates, extinguishes, and stupefies a people, till each nation is reduced to nothing better than a flock of timid and industrial animals of which the government is the shepherd. Now this has to happen to an extent if we are to have a technological society. And Jacques Ellul, a famous French sociologist, wrote a book called The Technological Society that explains this. There has to be a certain amount of organization as well as pre-planning in order to build a device like a computer or a smartphone or a car, because the initial investment is so huge. And if we want to be efficient and not be completely wasteful, we want to produce the right number of cars and cell phones and so forth. So there has to be planning, there has to be knowledge and collection of data so that people can make predictions. There's a basic objection to the idea of progressivism, and it's a very good one. What is best? What is just? This is the subject of Plato's Republic. It's not exactly a settled matter. It's a hard question like consciousness itself. But the basic Platonic objection to progressivism is that the most capable of us not only have the capacity to do great, but also have the greatest capacity to do evil. Now, we can take a look at progressivism and see where it's been leading us since 1913. We've had all kinds of wars. We currently occupy over 150 countries. Its fruit is houses of legislation that have been converted to whorehouses. It's wars, pestilence, disease. It's a law that has its operating principles hidden in sophistry, licentiousness, and intimidation. It creates a class of noble, honorable, and distinguished rulers who permit themselves to operate above the law in the name of progress. Madeleine Albright, when interviewed by a corporatist on mainstream media, had the following answer to the question of the sacrifice of 500,000 Iraqi children. I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it. Madeleine Albright, when asked about the sacrifice of 500,000 Iraqi children in the hunt for Iraqi WMDs. Progressives always blame those who make society better by making them a better car or making them a better pair of shoes as the source of all their problems, when really the capitalism simply means that the business owner, the person who runs the business, owns the means of production. Problems that we face are really due to the monetary system itself, not capitalists, not somebody who wants to build a factory and build a better pair of shoes. That's a good thing. 3, the belief in God. Liberty cannot be established without morality, nor morality without faith. Alexis de Tocqueville, Democracy in America. To believe in God is to believe there are absolutes in law. God is the lawgiver. Earthly philosophers deduce the word of God, the philosophy that everyone should follow to have safe and productive societies. Laws are the instrument of freedom and allow man to rise above nature, to expand horizons beyond simple need and want. God's laws prevent people from making themselves God, and they place all men under known universals, which is really the only kind of true law. The concept of God is an evolution of man's consciousness to obtain greater freedom. That freedom is threatened by a cruel and unforgiving bitch on one side, and the mother of all evil, statutory regulation without universals. The devil only operates by statutory laws because he cannot operate by universals. Most people, maybe even everyone, is extremely satisfied with the governments in the West. They don't seem to be operating in our interest. We grew up in an environment that created the belief that somehow our houses of parliament and Congress were churches of virtue, courage, wisdom, and prudence. We didn't say it that way, but when we take government's word in an unquestioning way, these are in fact our beliefs. Things may have always been this way, and the government may have always been operating against our best interests in secret. That's usually the case with governments. Without this internet awakening, most of us would not know what we know today. The knee-jerk reactions that we need more and bigger governments, and even a bigger government will be less corrupt and less wasteful and less warmongering than the current big government that we have. This seems to be what progressives demand, with more regulations and more laws. Environmentalism is a vehicle for that. More protection, more statutes, and more debt. On the other side of the fence, we have the anarchists who want no government. It's anarchism that our governments pretend to be afraid of. The nature of governance and law is undergoing a basic inversion, and the following David Spangler quote illustrates this inversion. No one will enter the New Age unless he will take a Luciferian initiation. In truth, our governments fear a re-emergence of Christian consciousness and knowledge of the law, and the necessity of universals. Christians are being persecuted in places all throughout the world that you're not hearing about on the news, because the powers that be in implementing this New World Order feel very threatened by Christian law. The New World Order cannot stand under Christian law. Christian law-based societies are being diluted and destroyed through multiculturalism, debt, wars, and other progressive ideals. Multiculturalism is not about equality or human rights. Governments that support multiculturalism are bombing these countries that these people have to come here. For every action of those who serve two masters, there's the profane reason and then there's the real reason. The machine that we have is currently broken, but that's no reason to think that it needs to be torn down. In reality, we just need to restore Christian law, and to do that we need monetary reform. There's no reason why our governments and politicians need to be prostitutes. Personally, when I ran for federal election, I heard remarks that you didn't look like a real party. you didn't have enough signs. Well, I had a very clear and logical platform, simply vote no to everything. And I should have gotten all the votes. It would be an inconvenience to start voting for monetary reform parties. It would certainly send a message. It can interfere with the comfort and convenience that surrounds us. It would clean the whores out of the whorehouse. It would set us on a path towards monetary reform in a house of only one master. Good people would go into politics. Good and honest people don't want to serve two masters. The few who understand the system will be either so interested in its profits or be so dependent upon its favors that there will be no opposition from that class, while on the other hand, the great body of people mentally incapable of comprehending the tremendous advantage that capital derives from the system will bear its burdens without complaints, and perhaps without even suspecting the system is inimical to their interests. Rothschild Brothers of London. Most of the problem is that most people simply don't know anything about the law. To truly understand the nature of our public monetary system is to see that it isn't lawful. No laws would have to be broken to abolish it altogether. The moral strength of the law is likely a major factor why Christian economies grew to the extent that they did. It creates a people that can contract effectively with one another. Almost all the great places in the world either are or were Christian-based societies. Christian-based societies generate terrific wealth and material well-being. The Christian law itself represents an evolution of religion. Societies based on Christianity and its ideals are built into the courts and governments in the form of the Holy Trinity. They shaped a society that was strong, free, and ethical, and that it did things because it believed them to be right. The voting public at least had this expectation and voted along these lines. People went to World War II because they thought it was necessary. People fought World War I, and people that are fighting all the wars today believe that they're necessary. Christianity is not a statutory or heavily ecclesiastic type of religion. It's more closely related to anarchy, but much more carefully considered. It has a few statutory requirements, other than Sunday being a day of rest. One does not engage in man's law on Sunday. Sunday being a day of rest is not a requirement of God. It's something that man does for man. Kant says that Christianity approaches his ideal of a religion. That is, that it's based on virtue rather than statutory requirements. It's a religion of consciousness. It should not be confused with its institutions and their statutory requirements. My yoke is easy and my burden light. The Apostle Paul speaks on the Greeks in the following quote. Then Paul stood in the midst of Mars Hill and said, Ye men of Athens, I perceive that in all things ye are too superstitious. Acts 17-22. There's a force that lies within the power structure that wishes our current form of law to be undermined. The basic requirement of fact and right are being destroyed. The idea is to convert our governments into one underworld government that adopts what is known as the Jewish Noahide laws as a replacement for all these warring religions that will result from multiculturalism. Noahide law is in no way compatible with Christian law. If there's one thing that I can get you to look at after watching this video, it's to look up information on Noahide laws, the education days of Congress and Parliament around the world, and the Chabad Lubavitcher movement. Chabad is spelt with a CH. Everyone should know about Noahide laws. If I told you about them here, you just wouldn't believe me. All wars are holy wars, and we all supposedly have the same God, but we fight over statutory requirements. This is true, although motivation for fighting a war is money, according to Plato. People really only kill each other for moral or ethical reasons. Kings go to war, bankers make the profits, and soldiers fight for what they believe is right. Truth is the first casualty of war. Christians have been fighting a lot of wars. Christian Zionists seem to always want wars. They want whatever Israel wants, and they have the resources to get it. They vote. Zionism isn't Christian Testament. There's no requirement for Christians to lie down their lives for Jews, although Jews do in fact believe otherwise to the extent that they follow their Babylonian Talmud, just as we are Christians to the extent that we follow our book, the New Testament. Zionism isn't Christianity, it's a new Christianity. It's reinterpreted for the birth of Zionism. Zionism isn't Judaism. Christ once said to judge a tree by its fruit. This is another tree entirely. At home, I think younger people tend to associate Christianity with Zionism and someone trying to coax giraffes onto an ark. They do not wish to be associated with it due to its association with Zionism and its superstitions. It's been discredited among the minds of many. And this is mainly because it's being interpreted in a materialistic sense, and it should be interpreted in terms of ought rather than is. It's a book of laws. It's not a science book, it's not a history book, it's a book of laws. In many cases told as parables, as in the case in the New Testament anyway. Compare the length of the New Testament with that of the Babylonian Talmud, occupying upwards of 30 volumes of statutory laws passed down by rabbis in an oral tradition. Consider our growing statutory government and consider the Noahide laws. The world of the future will have two sets of laws, Talmudic statutes for members of the Jewish faith and Noahide laws for those who serve them. The world will be adjudicated by the Talmudic Sanhedrin priesthood in Israel, who say that when Moses wrote the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai, they stuck around after everybody else left, received additional laws, and became the chosen people of God. And the original Zionist slogan, "A land without a people for a people without a land," disclosed its own negation when I saw the densely populated Arab towns dwelling sullenly under Jewish tutelage. Christopher Hitchens. Jews are led by statutory regulation and fear due to Holocaustianity. Imagine if you lived in a closed community where you thought that everyone on the outside wants to set you on fire and use your skin to make lampshades. Holocaustianity is a state-protected religion because it can't really stand up to rational inquiry, which is why it's being protected from it. It is now fear and excessive statutory regulation that is shaping the world around Christian societies.